Redditors? What's the scariest gut feeling you had that came true? My wife made a new friend at work. One night we went to her and her boyfriend's house so I could meet them. Something felt off as soon as we got there, but I chalked it up to the house being in pretty bad shape. Just gross. Roaches and such. Then the boyfriend got home, and I've never felt dread like that when shaking his hand. He seemed normal enough, but something just gave me major creeps and had my hackles raised. Couple weeks later, he's on the front page of the local paper for having imprisoned a woman in their basement and raping her for weeks. She was very likely right beneath our feet while we were there. Story 2. Years ago, I was driving home from dropping my partner at the train at 4 a.m. Only me and one other car on the road. He started turning where I turned twice so I didn't go home. I went to an all-night gas station and called the police. I gave them a description of his car. 3 weeks later, he was arrested. Turns out he was following women home and driving past their house and doubling back to rape them. No one had noticed his car. I'm glad I paid attention. Story 3. When I was in high school, I went on a group trip that included a visit to an observatory. There was a big dome with a telescope on the second story of the building, and you had to go up a ladder to get up there. A bunch of my friends were already up there checking it out and saying how cool it was, so I started climbing up. The moment my head was inside the dome, I suddenly felt ridiculously uneasy and said, without thinking, "Someone died in this room." I immediately climbed back down the ladder and found the tour guide and asked, "Did anything ever happen up there?" He looked nervous and hesitated, but then said, "Well, an astronomer hanged himself from the telescope in the 1940s. I was absolutely horrified and went outside and refused to go back in for hours until it was time to leave. Not long ago, it dawned on me that, this having happened in the early aughts when you couldn't just look everything up online, I never actually verified the tour guide's story. So I Googled it and, yep, 100% true. It was reported in the New York Times when it happened. Story 4. Our neighbors had an older lady who lived with them, never left the house, and was always in the kitchen working. They spun the story that she was their mother, their children's grandmother, and she lived with them to help around the house. We took this at face value, but it never seemed right. They would go away for a month every year, and she would be left in the house, not allowed to leave for the month they were away. It sounds terrible now, but we actually affectionately nicknamed her the slave, because she seemed to always be working around the house. Turns out they brought her over on a 3-month visa, didn't allow her to leave, and held her a slave in their house for 8 years. Our now ex-neighbors have both just been found guilty of holding a slave for 8 years and various other charges. Edit. To clarify where I am from, this is not common. My neighbors were the first prosecution of a domestic slavery case. Story 5. I was 18 and had just moved into my own apartment. The complex was managed by the owner's son, and right from the get-go he seemed off to me. Nothing that I could articulate, but I felt uncomfortable around him. Since he was frequently at the complex for one reason or another, I kept my door locked and chained whenever I was home, and I would literally run away if I saw him outside to avoid talking to him. Well, one day I grabbed the local paper, and on the front page is this guy's face. He had fallen in love with a previous tenant and had harassed her and her boyfriend and continued to stalk her after she moved away. She was a grade school teacher, and he waited outside the school for her, shot and killed her in front of the school kids, and then killed himself. Edit. I found an article about it. I misremembered some details. He did harass a woman who lived at the apartment complex and attacked her boyfriend, but the woman he killed was someone he knew from college, and he died in a shootout with police, not from suicide. Story 6. I gave birth in November to a baby girl who had a very rare neurological disorder. She hardly moved at all in utero, but when I told my doctors, they all said that every pregnancy/baby is different, etc. I have a healthy son. So I tried to put my worries to bed. We had a completely normal pregnancy, totally normal tests. No indication of trouble. Then she was born. The second she opened her eyes for the first time, I got a horrible, sinking feeling in my gut. There was no there behind her eyes. We were still in the delivery room. There were pictures taken, and in every one I look wary, scared. There were immediate problems. She didn't latch, she had no reflexes, etc., etc., etc. I shoved all my worries down. She was born a few weeks early. Everyone kept saying, "Bottle feed her and she'll perk up once she gets closer to her due date." Every nurse, every doctor, every lactation consultant. We were released from the hospital with a healthy baby. Nope, nope, nope. A week later, we were back in the NICU because she was still lethargic. She wasn't eating. It turns out she was basically brain dead the entire time. I didn't want to know, but I knew. I knew the moment I looked in her eyes. ETA. The diagnosis was Ohtahara syndrome, a catastrophic and fatal epilepsy disorder of infancy. No family history of seizures. A complete surprise, medically speaking. We took her home from the NICU, and she passed away in our arms at 16 days old. Story 7. I worked at a hospital PRN and frequently picked up extra shifts. I worked overnights and had asked the supervisor to go ahead and put me down to work the next night. Well, as the night went on, I just felt fucking awful, like completely doomed. I had never wanted so badly to be home. I lived an hour away from my job. So by the morning, I called the supervisor and asked her to remove me from the schedule. So I went home, feeling unexplainably scared. By the time I woke up, I was getting calls that an EF5 tornado had hit the town I worked in and the hospital I worked at. Story 8. By the time I was 13, my mom had been battling cancer for a year and a half. It was a few days after my birthday, and she was due for an IV port surgery the following morning. Just a simple day surgery, right? She came to my room to say goodnight, and I freaked out. For some reason, I knew this surgery would not go well. This is after she had lung surgery and multiple bouts of chemo and radiation on her chest and brain. She reassured me that it was fine and that we would go bowling a few days later. She never returned home. During the surgery, her remaining full lung collapsed, and it went entirely downhill from there. Just over a month later, she passed away. I have no idea what caused my fear of that being the end, but unfortunately I was right. Story 9. When I was around 6 years old, I was riding in the front seat. It was the 80s, no one cared about booster seats. My mom was driving and my little brother in the back in his car seat. Something told me to get in the back seat right then. So, I told my mom I was getting in the back with my brother. As I jumped in the back seat, someone hit the front of the car and into a stop sign. The stop sign went through the windshield of our and embedded into the passenger seat right where my head was. My mom was pregnant with my baby brother at the time, but thankfully, everything was fine with her. The only injury I received was a black eye from hitting my brother's car seat because I wasn't buckled up yet. I've always listened to my gut since then. Story 10. I was talking to a guy on OkCupid and he asked me to meet up with him. He seemed normal and trustworthy over text, but right before I pulled up to the coffee shop we were supposed to meet at, I had a sinking, terrible gut feeling. I Googled his name, and an arrest record popped up for a guy that had kidnapping and rape charges. I left the coffee shop as quick as I could and never responded to him again. Story 11. I had these weird feelings for a while that something bad was going to happen. I shrugged it off as maybe I was paranoid or whatever. I told my partner at the time to call his parents to check on them, and I called mine. All was well, so I just went about my day. I couldn't shake this idea that something was still going to happen. However, it was late, and I knew family would be in and asleep for the night. I had to take some medicine to help me sleep just to get over that massive pit in my stomach. I crashed out, and when I woke up, there were 20 missed calls from my family. I was in panic mode trying to call someone back, and finally, I got a hold of my mom, who told me my dad had a major heart attack. I didn't know what to think other than if I had actually known what it was, then maybe something could have been done. He ended up needing a triple bypass and said he was lucky. I was deemed the black cat of the family quickly. Story 12. A few years ago, I went on a date with a man. He was pleasant and good-looking with a really good job, wrote for a big city newspaper. He had everything I was looking for, but something didn't feel right, and I almost got an asexual vibe, or maybe that he just wasn't that into me. So I was very surprised he wanted a second date. Knowing I was broke, he offered to take me to an expensive date. Normally, I wouldn't take someone up on that feeling, worried I'd owe them, but my grandmother told me he looked like a nice man, and I needed to let someone do something nice for me. The date was going well. I drank some wine. Afterwards, he told me he wanted to show me some kittens he rescued, knowing I was big into animals and had rescues myself. He made me a drink when I go there, and I should have noticed, But in hindsight, he did not drink anything, and I wasn't in the room he made it. I remember feeling suddenly very sick and rushing to his bathroom. I have flashes of getting in his bathtub with the door shut, feeling nauseated. That to me is so shockingly rude. I would never ever just get into a stranger's bathtub. After that, I remember only bits and pieces. Him leading me to a room and him on top of me, and then him dropping me off to my apartment. I had a rape kit done, but no real evidence, other than red marks, possible ligature marks on my neck that shocked the nurses. When I told my grandmother, she told me, "Well, I didn't tell you to go back to his place." I still feel so naive and stupid. He now works for a very prominent national newspaper, and when I saw an article he wrote in support of the Me Too movement, I felt such rage. I now trust my gut instinct and never second think it. Thank you for watching the video. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell. We will be updating you with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.